Welcome to What's Your Next Move, the podcast for peak performers who are making things happen but are running into roadblocks that prevent them from getting what they want. Whether you work for someone else, you're an entrepreneur, thinking about starting your own business, or at a point in your life where you just can't make the move from where you are to where you want to go, you're in the right place. This podcast is all about answering one question: what's your next move? And helping you harness your power so your next move is the one that changes your life. I'm your host and resident provocateur, Arlene Battishill, and I want to know, what's your next move? Hi there, I'm Arlene Battishill, your host and resident provocateur, and I am thrilled to welcome my guest, Anthony Treas, who has got a story that most people will never have. And just by way of background, he is an Iraq war veteran. He has gone through extensive education in public health as it pertains to men's health. He has a coaching business and he works almost exclusively with men. And one of the things I find most interesting is that for the men I have experienced or encountered who are doing coaching for men, a lot of it has to do with fitness, but it doesn't extend beyond just the overall physical fitness of a man in the way we understand physical fitness. It goes deep into the mind and in how we get the mind in its best shape possible. And all of this is, of course, shaped by Anthony's experience in his deployment to Iraq in 2010. So, Anthony, it is such a great pleasure to welcome you to the show today. I think we're going to have an amazing conversation because of your experience and the things that you have come to learn in your life as a result of those experiences. So I'm going to welcome you and invite you to share anything else you'd like to share about your coaching business and anything else that you're doing in your life today. So welcome.
Thank you. It's an absolute honor to be here with you, Arlene. It's great. I'm excited. I'm really excited to share with your audience and just have a great conversation with you.
Oh, that's lovely. And by way of background for our listeners today, I had an experience last week where I attended a podcasting conference, and all of the attendees had an opportunity to make a pitch, a 2-minute pitch to a panel of top podcasting influencers. And we were selected by the first letter of our first name to go up and make our pitches. And on the second day, Anthony, because he's an A, and Arlene, because she's an A, were in line to go ahead and make our pitches. And Anthony was actually standing right in front of me, getting ready to make his pitch. Yes. And I have to tell you, as I was standing off on the sidelines, sort of bouncing up and down on my feet and shaking my hands just to, get the nerves out, Anthony just went up there and he grabbed that microphone and he brought the house down. So when he came back to the table, I handed him a note and I said, "You have to be on my show, dude. There are just no two ways about it. You're fucking fabulous." So
awesome.
It was the first time I had met Anthony, and he just made an incredible presentation. And as I said, I'm so thrilled to have you today. So, you know what? Why don't we just start with where you are today, because we'll go back in time in just a moment. But I find the kind of coaching that you're doing to be really, really interesting. And you have a website called strongmencoaching.com. And Anthony, why don't you walk me through what it is that you're doing in your coaching business?
Yeah, what I'm doing, Arlene, is, something that I think one thing that a lot of men are struggling with, and it's kind of an issue for a lot of people, and it's kind of, you hear a lot of it in the media, and there's just this stigma around mental health. And coming back after my deployment, I began to struggle with PTSD, anxiety, and depression. I never felt these things before, so it was for me. I thought I would just come home, I'd reintegrate, I felt normal, I felt okay, and then I come home and I'm having nightmares. I'm waking up in the middle of the night and literally not even knowing where I'm at. Like, I know I'm in a bed, I'm sitting up, and like, I don't even know where I'm at. And I continue to have these these incidents where I'd be driving and my heart rate would start speeding up, and I'd be driving under an overpass. And these are just situations that I was in Iraq, where we would drive under bridges, and we had lost a few soldiers from an IED that exploded underneath the bridge, and I'm back home, I'm driving, and my heart rate just starts beating fast, and I'm like, what's going on? I'm trying to figure out what's going on. And the more I began to see that I'm not doing well, I'm not doing great, I need to get some help. And so for me, kind of, I'm sure we'll share more about this, but for me, it got to the point where it was like, I eventually got to a point in my life where it's like, I'm not the only man who is struggling. And it's not just veterans, war veterans who are struggling with PTSD or this anxiety, this debilitating anxiety. And you mentioned earlier, it's like men's health. Oftentimes it's just about fitness and strength training.
Right.
And believe me, I'm all about that. I'm all about that too. I exercise, I do strength training, but that's just one little aspect of men's health. So men have been fed this information about working out and building muscles and strength training, but there's just so much more to it. And so for me, I got to a point where I was able to improve my condition, and it was something out of the normal, I guess, ways where people oftentimes they go and see a therapist or a psychologist, and oftentimes they're prescribed medications,
Right.
and I didn't want to go that route. I really wanted to try different means, different ways, and I eventually began to improve my life. But it was something that I was fortunate to have, where I ended up discovering that I didn't have a mental health issue. I had a brain health issue.
Yeah.
And that is what radically changed my life. And it's not that, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying everyone needs to go and get a brain scan. It really is individual, and it's really depending on the situation and things. But I have been someone who's been very curious about the brain for a very long time. And so it just kind of led me to that point where it's like, I'd love to get an image of my brain, just kind of see what's going on in my brain, and come to find out that what I was struggling with, and the brain scans kind of just confirmed what I had felt and what was going on with me. So it was something that not only changed my life, but changed my coaching, and really began to focus and helping men who are struggling with anxiety and mild depression. And really, there's, we'll talk about it some more, but there's really some internal things that are going on with men that are causing this anxiety.
Right.
And so, yeah.
Well,
kind of.
let me ask you this. In terms of your interest in the brain, did this predate your deployment? Or was this something that evolved over time as you yourself was dealing with the trauma associated with where you were and what you were doing and what you were seeing and experiencing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have been very fascinated with the human brain for as long as I can remember. And so it was something that, I've been very open as far as with the mind and the brain and the subconscious mind and these sorts of things before my deployment. And so I think it's kind of, in some ways, it kind of was a lifesaver for me, because to be honest with you, if I never would have gotten my brain scan, and really, really understood, it's just like your fingerprint, right? You can't deny your fingerprint. It's you, it's unique. And that's the same way with your brain. It's like, that's your brain, that we all have one, just like a fingerprint, but we all can function differently as far as like our brain and the capacity and the health of the brain. And so for me, I think in some ways I was lucky to just have this fascination with the brain early on, which eventually led me to the point where I looked into getting my brain scanned, and it really was a life changer for me in my situation.
And I have to assume that you had not had a brain scan prior to your deployment where you had sort of a before and after. Is that correct?
That is correct. And that brings up a good point, because it would have been great, right? Because then you have an idea of really what the cause was, because this is a story I really don't go into a lot, but I had a very, like many people, and I'm not saying necessarily my story is really rather unique, but I was physically abused by my father, and he was a very aggressive man, very mean, and so there's no way of telling if my brain was functioning that way, and then just the war kind of increased it and made it even worse, or if this was just a result of my deployment. And so for me, it was just it would have been great. But the thing with the brain scan, and one of the main reasons, one of many, was to get a baseline of where my brain is at. Because now that I have a baseline, because I'm 41, and so now, and oftentimes, now that I have a baseline, I can get a brain scan, 5 years, 10 years from now, and kind of see if it's improving, if it's getting worse. And one of the unique things that's about the brain scan is it can detect dementia or Alzheimer's up to 10 years in advance before any kind of physical outward symptoms.
Wow.
And so now that I have this scan, I can then track the health of my brain, the cognitive abilities, because that's what ends up happening as we age. And then I can take precautions to decrease the aging of my brain and to continue to maintain my cognitive health and abilities.
Right. And just this whole idea of, doing pre-tests and post-tests after traumatic events. And this could even be the same thing that applies to football players who are experiencing trauma to the head. A lot of people can understand trauma to the head because they see it happening on Monday Night Football, but they don't actually understand the trauma to the brain as a result of experiences that are so emotionally overwhelming that it sends the nervous system into shock, which then is triggering impulses all over the place in the brain back and forth. But most people don't understand that that's actually what's happening. And it really truly is the science of the brain, because, I know in the whole history of the public and academic conversation around post-traumatic stress disorder is that everyone talks about it, to your point earlier, everyone talks about it as if it's a mental health issue. But I think that when we talk, because of the way the public conversation has addressed the whole issue of mental health, we have this picture in our head of these crazy people walking around the streets, talking to themselves, and aren't actually understanding that when people suffer trauma, it always ends up as post-traumatic stress disorder. We just don't walk around saying generally, oh, I have PTSD, because then everybody is dismissing us. But if there has been trauma, which for most people, I mean, you clearly had a trauma earlier on in your life with what happened with your father that has an impact on how you operate out in the world and the extent to which you can manage certain stressors on your nervous system. And what I'd like to explore with you is this whole issue around mental health, because this has been a huge problem dating back to, the Vietnam War and the veterans who were coming home and the suffering they were experiencing, and the way in which people who have experienced extreme trauma, which is what happens in war. It's probably the most extreme form of trauma aside from, sexual interference. But it's such an overt and, excuse the expression, explosive type of trauma. And can you talk a little bit about your experience with the whole idea of talking about all of this in terms of mental health versus it being an issue with the brain? Because to me, mental health and the brain are two very, very different things in the way that we've talked about it. And then I'd like to ask you to expand on that a little bit in terms of the coaching and the extent to which your success with your clients is tied to the idea that we're going to get rid of this idea of mental health and we're just going to start looking at your brain and how that can neutralize our own sense of shame and other feelings we have around the fact that we're struggling. So I know those are a lot of questions all in one, but take me wherever
Yes.
you'd like to take me with that.
Yeah, and I'm really excited and happy that you're asking these great questions, because the more people that listen to these types of messages, especially about mental health, and just how you use the example of, we think mental health is, someone who's crazy, somebody who's out in the streets talking to themselves, and and you also bring up a good point about football and about these sports that can cause concussions and things. And what ends up happening is, I've heard a number of different stories where kids who were these normal, just your happy-go-lucky kids, and they hit a soccer ball on their head, or they play football, and then before you know it, they're starting to be more aggressive. They're starting to be more argumentative, and most times parents might think it's just a transition, from teenagers, and it's just a teenager thing, and then eventually they do something that gets them in trouble with the law, and before you know it, they're in jail, and it just started from getting hit in the head.
Yeah.
But no one would ever have known that. Because we don't think about the brain. We often think about when we eat and when we physically exercise, it's just the body. But our brains are the very thing that we use to make the decisions that we make on a daily basis. And our life is based off of the decisions that we make every day. The decisions to be an entrepreneur, decisions to be to go to work, and to be in a relationship, and all these things that impact our life. We're going to make 100 decisions today, but the thing that makes the decisions is our brain. But yet we don't consider it as something that we ought to take care of. We often think, let's eat right for our bodies. Let's drink water to feed our bodies, but we don't think about the brain that is the powerhouse for our decisions. And so with mental health, that is where the changes is going to be, where it's more of, hey, let me see how my brain is functioning before I start taking any medications. And that's what the VA, the Veterans Administration, wanted to put me on right away when I got back home. It was kind of like, okay, let's dumb them down, let's get them calmed down, and that can be okay. But what ends up happening is there ends up being side effects from those types of medications. And the one unique thing about when you can get a brain scan is they know exactly where you're very active, right? Where your brain is very active. And if your brain is too active in certain parts, you'll be an aggressive type person. You'll not think about the decisions or the actions that you're taking and how they're going to impact your life. And so that's what we end up doing. People end up doing things that may think, well, that's just not me, but it was this other thing or this other situation that caused me to do it. And it's just like our brain is vitally important to take care of and to consider when we're looking at our overall life and our overall what we do in our life and for our well-being. And so for mental health, we all go through tough times, without a doubt. And there is absolutely nothing with wrong. I went through therapy for 6 years. And there was, I felt in some ways, off and on for 6 years. And I felt in some ways I was getting better. And then I'd want to kind of give it my go. And so I'd stop therapy, and then I'd struggle, and then I'd go back and kept on doing this back and forth thing. And I'm like, I end up getting to the point where it was like, and how frustrating you can probably imagine that I wanted to get better. I knew in my heart, in my soul, that I wanted to improve my life. I didn't want to live that way anymore. If I would go to a restaurant, I'd have to know where the exit sign was at. If I was at walking down a sidewalk and there was somebody behind me, I'd have to move to the side so they can walk past me. And everywhere, if I was in a car with a lot of people, I couldn't sit in the back because I'd have this huge anxiety attack, like someone just bear hugged me and just shoved me in a cave, and it'd be like, just so many situations, and it was like, I can't live this way anymore. And it
Right.
started impacting every area of my life. My relationships suffered as a result of it. My
Of
life, my
course.
health suffered.
Hmm.
And so for me, it's vitally important that we look at mental health in a whole new different light. Even though
Hmm.
we go through tough times and we
Hmm.
go through life, and if you've lived long enough, you're going to have those times, and there's nothing wrong with needing someone to help you get through that point in your life,
Right.
and wanting to just improve your life, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. And
Hmm.
doesn't mean you're a bad person, doesn't mean that you are crazy or that you have these other things that are happening, but it is something that I think more people are going to be more accepted to, willing to get, to talk to somebody and get that help, and
Hmm.
that's okay. And,
Right.
and it would be great for people to reconsider their whole view and their idea of what mental
Hmm.
health really is. And for
Well,
me, I look at it where, as I mentioned before, I didn't have a mental health issue where the
mhm.
whole time I was being fed, you have PTSD, you have anxiety, you have depression, you have these suicide thoughts, and it's just like, ah, you know, but what it came to be is I didn't have a mental health issue. I had a brain health issue, and it was just like,
Right.
that's okay. I
Right.
didn't have any moral wrongs with me.
Right, for sure. And, this whole thing around the language of mental health, I mean, when you think about it, if we use the term mental fitness, everybody's, oh, yeah,
Mm,
yeah, yeah, I want mental
yeah,
fitness.
yeah,
But when you
yeah,
use the term mental health, everybody's like, oh, no, that's
yeah,
not me. That is not anything
yes,
having anything to do with me. Stay away from me.
yeah. Or
And
we talk, yeah, or we talk about brain hacks. We talk about
yeah.
these
Hmm.
things to make more performance. We talk about
Yeah.
performance, and that's with all these things. It's like, oh yeah, I'm all about mental
Hmm.
performance and visualization and these sorts of things. It's just like, that's just all, So you're
Yeah.
absolutely right.
Yeah, it's crazy how much the language that we use, just the
Mm,
difference between those two words, influences how we perceive what we're talking about here and how we perceive ourselves. And let me ask you, in your coaching practice, where you're dealing with primarily men who are
mhm,
experiencing anxiety that is a result
mhm,
of either PTSD or some other trauma that
mhm,
they've experienced that has produced this condition where they are struggling so mightily. When you
mhm,
have talked to them about the whole idea of brain health and brain fitness and
mhm,
mental fitness, when you talk about it with that language, do you get the sense that your clients exhale in some way? Because what you're saying to them is that there actually isn't anything wrong with them. There's nothing
mhm,
deficient or defective about them, and there needs to be an adjustment in their brain so that they no longer have to take on all of the judgment that
mhm.
exists around things like trauma and PTSD. Have you found that to be a significant factor in the clients you've worked with and the success that you've had with them?
Yes, just like I'll share with you my experience when after I had my brain scans. It's a 2-day process. They take a scan at rest and then a
Mm-hmm.
scan during concentration because they want to see where's your brain most active when you're at resting. These are
Mm-hmm.
these thoughts that you have. You can't focus. What's going on when you're resting? And when you're focusing, you're having problems focusing. Let's see where's your brain active while you're focusing. And I just remember walking in, and mind you, as I mentioned, I'm very fascinated with the brain. So I was excited to see, like, let's take a look at my brain. I want to see these pictures. And I went in and I sat on the couch, and right before me there was like this little table, and there's were my scans of my brain. And right there before me, my doctor had circles of where the PTSD and the obsessive compulsive and the hyperactive and the hypervigilant comes from. And I'm just looking there, and I'm just like, wow,
That
I,
explains it all.
like, yeah, it was to me. I was, wow. I'm okay. Like this is like, I'm a good person. It was a relief. It was an exhale. It was like, wait a second, I could go, I could share this with people, and that that I can explain, like, look, this is what's been going on with me and this is what's happening. And for me, there was just no denying it.
Mm-hmm.
Here it is before me, and it was just phenomenal. So with my clients, it's the same thing, and it's
Mm-hmm.
not that they all go and get brain scans, but for them to understand that that they're okay, and for them to understand, and develop skills and
Mm-hmm.
techniques that would help them in eliminating. And as I mentioned before, what I end up discovering with men is that there's just this underlying thing that's causing them to have anxiety, whether it's something they're holding on in the past, something that they're struggling with, regrets, not feeling fulfilled as a man,
Mm-hmm.
is really where I'm finding a lot of of struggles with men. And yes, some of them have had traumatic experiences as kids and as children, and then or as adults, and so. But it's more of that. There's an underlying issues going on that they're able to develop a new vision for their life, a new mission, as I mentioned in my pitch, where men need a mission, a purpose,
Mm-hmm.
and when they find that, then they're more engaged as a husband, as a father, as a
Mm-hmm.
person, because now they're not so worried that there's something wrong with them. They're not so worried
Mm-hmm.
that or embarrassed that their friends seem to be doing okay, but they're just not feeling good about themselves. And so it's been a unique experience in sharing this and really helping them to improve their brain health,
Mm-hmm.
and to look at the brain in a whole new way, that when they're eating, what are they drinking? What are
Mm-hmm.
that now they're like, is this something that's going to be impacting? Is this going to support what I'm trying to do with my life?
Mm-hmm.
And then that's kind of that's the enlightenment, if you will, where now
Mm-hmm.
they begin to think, wait a second, if this brain of mine is the one that's helping me to create the kind of life that I want, I think I ought to take care of my brain just as much as I need to take care of my heart,
Mm-hmm.
and it's fascinating. It's fascinating. And then they end up making changes in themselves and in their families. And that, to me, is the biggest reward, to hear their relationships are changing, they're engaging with their children and being more involved. And to me, it's that right there is my purpose and my
Mm-hmm.
mission, to help men be fulfilled themselves and re-engage in their relationships and in their
Mm.
life and in their friendships.
Wow, that's really beautiful. And I think you're spot on when you're talking about the need that men have for a purpose and a mission. And,
Mm-hmm.
I think a very deep part of that is a sense of feeling relevant. And I know in
Mm-hmm.
many relationships, men will not feel relevant in the household because the wife is, basically running the show. With all due respect to all the women who are listening, but,
Mm-hmm.
women, especially
Mm-hmm.
women who become mothers, because they're dealing with their own anxiety around being the best possible mother. And am I making a mistake with my kids? Or my kids going to go off the rails, 25 years from now, and I'm still responsible for them, and all this kind of stuff,
Yes.
that the men,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to suggest that men get kind of pushed to the side, but there can be that effect where all of a sudden it's not so much that the man needs to be in charge, but he does need to be and feel relevant
Mm-hmm.
in that environment. And one of the things I'm wondering, if you can share your thoughts on this, is when a person, and in your case with your clientele being primarily men, and even in your own experience, what is the connection between the experience of the trauma, or I should say the lasting effects of the trauma, and this sense of mission and purpose? Is there a relationship where the trauma itself is actually having a very negative impact on their sense of mission and purpose?
That's a wonderful question. I'm really glad you brought it up, because when someone has a traumatic event in their childhood, as you know, and as you can imagine, when we're young and our brains are developing, and in fact, our brains are not fully developed. For women, it's around 24, 25. And for men, it's around 25, 26, 27 years old for the brain to fully develop. And what ends up happening when a child goes through a traumatic event in their life, the brain begins to process fear in a different way than, and I'll give you an example. So kind of give you two scenarios. Imagine one child where the child gets in trouble with his father, and the father goes and grabs a belt and begins to spank the child as hard and as that he can. Right. And the child is crying that, this is his father. This is the person that's supposed to love him and care for him. Right. And the father, the boy goes off and he cries, and the dad goes off. And that's scenario one. Right. Scenario two is the father goes and sends the child to the room because he's did something, and sends him to his room, takes away his toys, and then an hour later goes in and sits next to his son, and he begins to say, "Son, the reason why you're in your room and the reason why I've taken away your toys is because of XYZ." He gives the child a hug. He gives him a kiss on the forehead, and then, that's end of scenario two. So you kind of just paint those two pictures. What ends up happening with the brain is that the traumatic event leaves a lasting effect, that when that child is now an adult and they go through a stressful time, or a stressful time in their life, in a relationship, in a job, what ends up happening is, for that that person who had a traumatic event as a child, that stress level is elevated and stays elevated longer than somebody who had an event in their life where they were able to receive love and affection. And when they go through a stressful time, whether in a relationship, a job, whatever, they're able to be stressed, and then it calms down. The body then calms down. And it's not a lasting effect. So those who have had multiple traumatic events, the brain has been able to, it's fight or flight, right?
Yes, exactly.
So those who have traumatic events in their life, they're in an amplified level, and their bodies have a difficult time de-stressing. That there's these chemicals that released in our brains that allows us to de-stress. But when you have these examples in your life, so what ends up happening is there are many of us. Of course there are people who had really good childhoods, but there are unfortunately many who we all went through different experiences with our parents, and as you mentioned, no parent is perfect, but there are some lasting effects to those things. That's why our childhood is such a pivotal point in our life, because that those experiences lead into our adult life, even though we're no longer children per se, but it leads into how it impacts us in our life in the future. And I'll share, for me, that those events impacted my life immensely, because I lived in fear. I lived in fear for so long, because everything about my father, it was just like I lived in fear, and then it impacted who I felt as a man. It impacted me in my relationships. It impacted me in my businesses. It impacted me and I felt like everything had to be perfect for me before I put it out there. I've had so many failures. I'm embarrassed to tell you, but then again, it's kind of brought me to where I'm at right now.
Yep.
But
I'm sorry. I mean, it's just the shared experience among entrepreneurs where, somebody says, "Oh my God, I have lived more years of failure than I have of success," and we all just have this huge belly laugh because it's like, "Yeah, I'm right there with you, honey."
Oh yeah, and I can't. But it was that childhood experience where I lived in such fear for so long that, I didn't really stand up for myself. I didn't push. I was always afraid to be assertive when it was professional and needed to be assertive. It just impacted every area of my life. And then with business, always having everything to be perfect before I put it out there, or afraid to put something out there because of being judged and all these sorts of different things. And I got to a point in my life where luckily, and unfortunately, some people, I think there's many people who fortunately don't get to this point in their life, but I certainly was fortunate to finally say, you know what, enough is enough.
Yeah.
And I'm going to, and this is really something that's relatively new for me that's happened recently. In this arena within the last couple of years that I've had my this transition in my life. And so I really understand a lot of men who have gone through traumatic events, especially pertaining to their father and that relationship that has impacted their relationship right now as a husband, as a father, and as a family man, and just trying to be a professional in their profession or as an employee in every area of their life. And it impacts us in every way possible. And unfortunately, it's something that happened to us a long time ago.
Yeah.
But there does come a point where, and hopefully with many people who are listening to this, I'm going to get past this and I'm going to be the best I can be, and I'm going to move forward and I'm going to utilize that. And I think maybe in some way, Arlene, that this is how I've come to my purpose, where I want to help men be that best father they could be, because their relationship with their kids is so vitally important. They have so much power and influence in their children, for their son and for their daughter, for who she ends up deciding to spend her time with and his time and with, and so it's so important. And often have met people who their father isn't engaged in their life, and so they're struggling. And as I mentioned before about being fulfilled, if they're not feeling fulfilled, and having that mission, that purpose in their life, it does impact every area of their life. So it's exciting to see where men have reignited or not necessarily reignited, but chose their purpose and find their mission, and for that transition to happen in their life. It's absolutely incredible. And so I think as a result of my childhood experiences, that I don't want any child to go through what I went through, but also for men to be fulfilled as fathers and as husbands, and to reignite that relationship and have better relationships, whether that's their spouse or with their friends. So it's exciting to see, and it's really exciting.
Oh my gosh, Anthony, everything that you've said here is so rich. And, one of the things that struck me about your story of when you were young is that we also have to look at what's happening in the brain as we, as children, are experiencing these traumatic events. And it doesn't always have to involve violence or sexual interference. It can be something that involves the neglect of a child, or you grow up in a family of silence where, children are to be seen and not heard, and it affects your ability to attach to people. And what I was thinking as you were talking was about how if, in the two scenarios that you presented, where the child is essentially being punished for something versus being dealt with in a way that they are being taught about consequences of their actions, of behaviors and so forth. And it's done in a very loving and understanding way so that the child actually learns. And the reality is that in these experiences that we have throughout life that are traumatic, in whatever our definition is of trauma, we're actually learning something. It is the equivalent of taking a book and reading something and learning it. And our brain is taking that information in. Well, how is it any different when we're young or at any point in our life where we experience something that is traumatic, whatever that may be, and the degree to which it is? Our brains are taking in that information and are saying to us what we have learned is that in a situation where there's a child, and in your case, the father, the person who is in the position of power is going to hurt me, and I have to live in a state of fear and the need to protect myself and be anticipating the harm that is going to come to me, because that is what I have learned. And as a result, you go through life in relation to anyone else in your life who you may perceive has power over you. That could be your wife, it could be your boss, it could be your parent, it could be anybody in your life. And the way that you are going to experience that person is going to be in a perpetual state of anticipatory anxiety, because what you have learned, what your brain is telling you, the message that you're getting from your brain is that this is a dangerous situation for you. Why? Because that's how you understand dangerous situations. It looks like a certain thing. And would you agree that that's actually what's happening and how it's manifesting in our adult relationships?
Oh, absolutely. I agree 100%. And one of the things that is also important is I mentioned that when somebody does go through an experience in childhood and where there isn't love and affection, and there's just these sorts of experiences in their life, what ends up also happening, because later on, these scenarios that you just mentioned, what ends up happening is the body stays in this elevated stress state. And stress, little bit of stress is okay. That keeps us going. But when it's elevated, and it's elevated often, and it's elevated and it's maintains, that then leads us to be susceptible to chronic diseases, such as heart disease and diabetes and obesity and these many different chronic diseases. And it's a result of your childhood experiences. So those who have had childhood experiences or adverse, what they call adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, those who have had adverse childhood experiences are at a higher risk of developing chronic diseases just from their childhood experience. Not from exposures, not from toxins, not from anything else, not from foods that they eat or whatever, just as a result of that childhood experience, which keeps them at an elevated state and which then manifests in chronic diseases. And so people who are struggling with obesity and diabetes and heart disease and many of these other things, we are seeing kids today, and there's many factors involved, but young people in their 20s and 30s suffering from heart disease and suffering from obesity and diabetes, and then there's adults who also are suffering from these, and it's a result of this elevated stress response that happens in the brain, and it's because of that adverse childhood experiences. And so those who have had these experiences as a child really need to keep in mind that it's even more important for them to take care of themselves physically and mentally because they already are potentially at an elevated state. And there's things that are important, such as the nutrition that they eat, the food intake that they provide themselves, and the physical exercise that is beneficial for them. So absolutely, the things that every area of our life is impacted. And it's not that I think oftentimes where people would feel that, well, that happened in my past, I just need to just let it go. And that's true. There is a point where you do have to forgive and let go and just live in this present moment. But even when you forgive and or maybe even re-engage in that relationship, your brain is still operating the same.
And so is your brain.
Absolutely. Yeah, your physical response.
Yeah.
And so you might have forgiven and did what you felt like you needed to do to release that energy or release that experience in your mind, and that's good. But your brain has,
Mm-hmm.
for lack of a better term, kind of shifted and works differently as a result of that. So you may feel bad about yourself because you're like, why am I still feeling this way when I've forgiven him, when I
Mm-hmm.
love him and I care about him and stuff? Why am I still feeling this way? And it's like your brain is still operating in a way
Mm-hmm.
that is still kind of in that moment, if you will. But
Right.
it's because you now process stress differently or
Mm-hmm.
fearful situations differently than someone who not had experienced an adverse childhood experience.
Right, absolutely. And the whole part with the way the body is responding to those situations, to your point about how you can forgive someone, but that doesn't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily change the way your body is responding, because your body is storing all of these memories. And if you have come out of an environment where you have been afraid, or this, fight or flight sort of reaction,
Mm-hmm.
even as an adult, those body memories are still present and accounted for. And it just requires so much more effort to be able to keep, shall we say, keep yourself in check in those moments where, if you are with someone who has caused you harm, but have come to a place, both psychologically and emotionally, where, and I guess this is on the intellectual level, where you're able to forgive them and move on and even potentially have a
Mm-hmm.
relationship with them. You also have to understand that another part of this involves, how do you get the rest of your system, if you will, online, all
Mm-hmm.
operating, where they're all communicating with one another, saying there is no more threat here. That is an old threat. And I would imagine this ties
Mm-hmm.
right in with, like what you were talking about at the outset of our call, where you would be, having nightmares, and driving under an overpass, and the way that you're responding, it's like your entire
Mm-hmm.
system was freaking out in response to these perceived threats
Mm-hmm.
in the present, which were actually threats
Mm-hmm.
from another time, but your body's experiencing it, like you said, elevated heart levels and all of that. And so what I'm
Mm-hmm.
curious about, Anthony, is, in your own experience and your work with your clients and the advice that you give to people, especially when you're speaking or brought in to speak about these things and so forth, is, okay, if we accept that these are the conditions that we are living under, what are the techniques or
Mm-hmm.
strategies that we use, or you have found to be the most effective at bringing every part of the body online, if that's even possible, so that the person can actually
Mm-hmm.
look at that situation and say, oh, I see what's going on here. Yeah, this is that thing over there, but that's not the reality of where I am right now. What do you do in that situation,
Mm-hmm.
or how do you respond to that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Of course, it's going to be different for everyone, but some of the things that have been very effective is really practicing being in the present moment, in the sense that, um, and I know that could be difficult in some ways, where your mind is kind of going off in different directions, and your body you're having a physiological response. And one of the things that, two effective ways that have worked for me and my clients, is one is self-talk,
Mm-hmm.
where you would say, I'm okay. I am, you just kind of repeat, I'm fine. I'm
Mm-hmm.
happy. I'm fine. I'm good. I have great people around me. Just this self-talk, just this kind of soothing talk to yourself. Hey, I'm great. I'm good. I'm happy. I'm here. And start looking around and finding something that you appreciate. Just something that is around you, and just kind of bringing yourself right back into the present moment. The other thing that is very effective also is deep breathing,
Mm-hmm.
and breathing through your abdomen, and breathing in. There's a number of different techniques where you breathe in for 5 seconds, hold it for a second, and then breathe out for 5 seconds, and kind of just repeat that over and over again until you have felt relief. There's also EFT and tapping techniques that someone can do that helps in relieving the stress. It's kind of just starting to bring yourself back into the present moment in whichever capacity that could be. If someone's wearing a bracelet, and they have some sort of an attack, and they look down at their bracelet and they kind of just start playing with that bracelet or that watch or whatever it is that they might have, or they look at their wedding ring and they kind of just start playing with that and just repeating something that feels good to them about their wedding ring, and they start whatever that word or phrase may work for them. So those are some of the things that that someone can learn to do. I know for myself, for many years, I had extreme claustrophobia, and whenever I would go into a plane was the worst. I was, oh my goodness, if I saw or heard that final door, that main cabin door close, I would just start getting like almost where I was going to have to run out of the plane. And I laugh at it now, but I'm not, but I just kept doing the self-talk and the deep breathing, and, and just be in the present moment and just laugh at, whatever is that positive is whatever, where you're flying to, you're going to see, you're going to visit, you're going to experience, you just kind of bring yourself into that, whatever, feel good idea or image comes to your mind. So definitely those have helped and have been very effective in helping people to deal with that present situation that they're dealing with.
It's really interesting, the kind of things that you've just suggested as techniques to be able to address a situation like the many that we've been talking about, is that, I think there's a way that people dismiss this idea of think positive thoughts or think happy thoughts or focus on the present. But I think there's a way that they're actually dismissing those things because they're not understanding what's actually happening in the brain. Because by virtue of you doing things that are really deliberate to keep you in the present and aware of what your present is, it's actually triggering something in the brain that can have the effect of short-circuiting whatever it is that's got you spinning in that moment. And was this your experience, your own personal experience, that by just concentrating on those things that were present day, that there wasn't anything happening to you, and by focusing on your wedding ring or focusing the tapping, anything like that, that it actually would bring you into the present and reduce the anxiety a little bit?
Yeah, for me, so I mentioned that I've been very interested in the brain for quite some time. The other thing that I've been really interested for quite some time is sports performance. And I love hearing about sports and stories and people who have really excelled. And so for me, you look at Olympians, you look at professional athletes, you look at any sport, what do you think they're saying to themselves before they go and perform? They're saying self-talk. We kind of think, well, self-talk, Anthony, what am I supposed to say to myself? I'm not going to talk to myself. I'm not going to, I'm not a crazy that's ridiculous. Yeah, exactly. But look at those athletes are saying, I am awesome. I am incredible. I am having the time of my life. I am living my life to the fullest. This is awesome. I am excited. I am, they're saying, they're talking to themselves right before they jump in the pool and they're going to run down. They're saying, I am incredible. I'm the greatest. I'm the best. So why couldn't I use those same things right before I'm going to do a talk, or right before I'm going to have, some kind of event? So for me, I started thinking, wait, if those athletes, if that person who just won gold medal, I know before they did, they were saying, I'm incredible, I'm amazing, I am outstanding, I'm a great person, I'm a great athlete. Then why couldn't I do that as a person for my own life? You know, I'm about to, you know, if I'm in a plane, it's just like, oh man, I'm just, you know, whatever the event I'm going to, or what am I going to do, is I can go back to those incredible times that I've had, and to think of those things like, Anthony, you've been there, you've done that, you're great, you've been to, you know, all these things. And I look at my experiences in war and living in a combat zone for my deployment is like, I started seeing my deployment as a positive. And all the things that I was exposed to and all the things that I survived. And now I'm here to tell the tale. Yeah. And I know that for so many people, it is a struggle. But I have done things that very few people ever will get a chance to do. And not that I would want them to ever do it, but to know that these things, that they can make us stronger, they can make us better. And for me, although I with the struggles that I had to deal with on my coming back home, for many people who are listening, one of the biggest struggles that men and women have after coming back from a deployment is the transition period. It is extremely difficult to go from this very high experience, these things that you had a mission, you had a purpose, you had a job, and it mattered. You know, and then when you come back home and you're like, you reintegrate with your family, and your family has grown, they have changed over the time you've been gone. Your family, your parents, they've been living for the last year, and they've changed too.
Right.
And and that's why where I've come to, I had to redefine my mission. The war mission was over. And I can't expect that I was going to live up to that expectation, or that performance. And so I had to redefine my mission. And for a while there, it was getting my education. After my deployment, I ended up getting my bachelor's degree and my master's degree, both in health, and which have led me, it kind of was just a story where one thing led to another. And because of that experience, I now get to help men and inspire men, and to help them become the best man that they can be, no matter what, if they've gone through a rough childhood, if they're in a job that they just hate, and finding that mission in their life. And it doesn't matter what age you are. I'm 41, about to turn 42, and I feel like I'm ready. All my life experience up to this point has made me to just excel from this point forward.
Oh my God, Anthony, that is so magnificent. I'm sitting here and I just looked at the clock and I just thought, are you kidding me? How on earth has this hour gone by this quickly? Because I have only, maybe 453,000 more questions for you. It's so wrong. Where'd that clock come from? I hate it. But, when you have a conversation, and all of my conversations with my guests are always substantive and meaningful. I think that what is different is the kind of experience that you've had, that very few people have an understanding of this particular experience. And, the things that, I am still curious about are many questions I would ask you in another conversation, are just, what is it that brought you into the military? What was your relationship with your commanders, given the relationship with your father? How did you end up in an environment that was basically very authoritarian, that could be triggering you all over the place? And I mean, there are a million questions here, and an amazing amount of learning that, hopefully I can have you come back and, have a follow-up conversation about these other questions, because I think they're really fascinating, and they really speak to your own personal journey. So if you're open to it, I would love to have that conversation in follow-up.
Absolutely. I would love to, Arlene. That'd be great.
That would be really great. Now, let me ask you, just as we're bringing this to a close for this one, since I'm going to have you come back, You
Yes.
know, as you think about where you are today, and as is the case
Mhm.
with the name of my podcast, what's your next move?
Yes, Arlene, I am about to embark on my next adventure. I am leaving on Monday, in fact, to where I am going to be traveling the world. And I am leaving. My first stop is in Colombia. I'm going to be traveling all throughout South America and then to Europe and then to Asia throughout. I'm just going to keep traveling. That is my next adventure. That is my next thing that I am going to practice what I preach. I've traveled, I've been to 13 countries so far, but I'm practicing what I preach and helping men to live that adventurous side of them. And it doesn't mean to go off abroad, but whatever that may mean for them to energize, to reignite that who they are inside so that they become the best man that they could be, the best husband, the best father they can be
Mm.
at any age. And so for me, my next move is traveling the world and sharing it with men as I encourage them to live out their adventurous side. I'm an adventurous person, and I am about to embark on this just here in a few days. And so I'm very excited, and that's my next move, and I am thrilled and excited about it and very happy.
Oh my gosh. And I'm so honored and feel so lucky that I got a chance to catch you for our conversation today before you left on this magnificent adventure. And I hope when you get back
Yes.
that we can connect afterwards so we can get set up for another conversation.
Yeah, I'll definitely be in contact everywhere I go. I'll have internet access.
Oh,
I
beautiful.
definitely have all my clients from around the world, and so that's part of my thing. Is that my business? I run it from anywhere, and so it's just a unique experience. And so I definitely would love to be on your show again. So
Beautiful. So I guess what I would ask you is if you have any parting thoughts for our listeners on any of the things that we've talked about today where, people may be struggling with it could be anything in their life right now where they are struggling to move from where they are today to where they're ultimately trying to go. And it could be in their relationship, it could be in their
mm,
work, it could be in starting a business and what have you. And do you have any,
mhm.
insights or words of wisdom that you'd like to share that people can maybe latch on to as something they can hold as they are going on their own journey?
Mm. Yes. One of the things that I would, for all the listeners, I'd encourage and challenge for us to start thinking about men, our, for it to be mental fitness, mental
Mm-hmm.
health. It has that negative connotation to it. And for us to start thinking about it, mental fitness, mental
Mm-hmm.
performance, and for that to be something that we start redefining that word and we still look at it in a new way, in a new light, so
Mm-hmm.
that we can bring more of a comfort and an acceptance that it is important. If we're just as important it is for us to take care of our physical body,
Mm-hmm.
it's even more to take care of that functioning, our cognitive ability that impacts every area of our life, our relationships, our friendships, our job, our businesses, our careers, our education, every single thing. So that is something that I would love for the listeners to start to reconsider and to start getting it out there and on social media, to start thinking of mental health in a whole new way and start thinking of it more of mental fitness, mental performance. And there's nothing wrong with that. The final thing is for them to think about that it's never too late to do what it is that you want to do in your life. And no matter our traumas that we might have experienced as a child and how they may be impacting us today, let that be the fuel that gets you to go out there and make a positive impact in this world. That it is the fuel that you have to start that business, that fuel that you have to start living your purpose and your mission that you have had and maybe have kept inside for so long. And no matter how old you may be or how young you may be, now is the time. And we need more people to be living their purpose and their mission than ever before, to help improve our environment, to help improve our relationships, to help improve this world be a better place. And so that'd be my lasting words that I hope people would consider, Arlene.
Oh, so beautiful, Anthony. Thank you so much for that. I mean, those words are so meaningful on so many levels, and I have no doubt that our listeners are going to deeply appreciate this conversation and you sharing your experience and insights and what you're doing to help people and the world at large today. And I wish you a magnificent and safe journey. And just to wrap up, can you let our listeners know where they can find you if they'd like to know more about you or reach out to you for any kind of coaching that might be beneficial to them?
Absolutely. They can reach me at strongmencoaching.com. That's strong, MEN, coaching.com. They can reach me there. They can also find me on Facebook and Twitter at Strong Men Coach. And that's how they could get a hold of me. And it'd be great to be able to help in any which way that I can.
Beautiful. And for those of you who are thinking of doing a Google search right after this episode, Anthony's last name is spelled Treas, as in Sam. Well, Anthony, this has been a wonderful time that we've spent together, and I thank you so very much for joining me. I really look forward to our next conversation, so thank you again.
Thank you, Arlene. I really appreciate this opportunity. It's been wonderful.
Beautiful. So there you have it, everyone. Another magnificent conversation. And as I always wrap up every episode, I ask you, what's your next move? I'm Arlene Battishill, and I'll be back with another episode. Welcome to What's Your Next Move, the podcast for peak performers who are making things happen but are running into roadblocks that prevent them from getting what they want. Whether you work for someone else, you're an entrepreneur, thinking about starting your own business, or at a point in your life where you just can't make the move from where you are to where you want to go, you're in the right place. This podcast is all about answering one question: what's your next move? And helping you harness your power so your next move is the one that changes your life. I'm your host and resident provocateur, Arlene Battishill, and I want to know, what's your next move?